Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the third and last webinar, part of our homework series. My name is Annick Glaude, and I'm the curator of the Varley Art Gallery of Markham in Markham, Ontario, Canada. First, while we were all connecting from our various locations around the real world, I see where we have some attendees from the UK and Australia and other parts throughout Canada and the United States. Welcome. I would still like to acknowledge that the Varley Art Gallery of Markham is situated on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. We also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land, and in particular, the First Nations community in closest proximity to us in New York region, the Chippewas of Georgina Island. Specifically, this statement means that the gallery is committed to learning the history of this land by doing our own research, by listening, and by collaborating. If you've joined us earlier this week, you will have heard some of this, but for our new attendees, Online is a joint initiative between Markham Public Art and the Varley Art Gallery of Markham. It delves into the potential of public art production and social engagement in the digital sphere. Driving it is the central question. Can this time of uncertainty be productive? Can it be an opportunity for us to pause and reflect, to reshape and imagine new public spatial relationships, whether built or natural, virtual or physical? Arising directly from the City Council approved Markham Public Art Master Plan 2020-2024, Online explores the multiple factors that steer the making of public art, how artworks find their sites and become public. Unfolding over the summer of 2020, Online has two parts: a practical webinar series on public art titled Homework, which is co-produced with public art consulting firm Art Plus Public Unlimited, and an online competition for speculative public art proposal titled Delimit. The entire initiative is hosted on and distributed by publicly available networks of digital platforms. On behalf of the Varley Art Gallery, I would like to thank the Ontario Arts Council and the Varley Mackay Art Foundation of Markham for their ongoing support. Yan?
Okay, thanks, Annick. My name is Yan Wu, the Public Art Curator at the City of Markham. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Online. Thank you all for coming and spend this beautiful Friday afternoon with us here in Toronto. As mentioned by Annick, we have prepared a summer-long online program on public art for you to participate, whether you consider yourself as the maker or the viewer or the producer. The reason behind choosing this platform is obviously COVID-related. And when Markham City Council formally approved the Public Art Master Plan, as Annick mentioned earlier, and the related implementation plan, I was planning a 3-day International Public Art Summit for June. Actually, it was supposed to happen a week ago, with public art consultant Rebecca Carbon, who is also one of the producers behind today's homework. A few weeks later, COVID-19 happened, like everything else and everyone else. We had to postpone the summit to the fall and explore ways to move it online. Today's event is part of this ongoing exploration. Please send us your feedback after the event and let us know how to improve, what works, what doesn't, what is missing. Help us to get ready for the larger summit in the fall. I believe we all have learned a lot about public space during this special time, the power of it, whether in virtual or in physical. What does it mean to be part of this space as a participating individual, as an agency? There is still a lot to learn, and the role of public art is definitely part of this learning curve. Back to today's program, Homework. It is a webinar series that is designed to explore the practical knowledge needed to conceptualize and produce public art projects, while focusing specifically on 3 themes: forms of rendering, proposal design, and materiality and fabrication. I do want to add one note here that our idea of being practical in this case does not mean we try to run a vocational school that is teach technical skills. What we're interested in is to provide a platform for knowledge exchange and production that is rooted in practice, but charged with critical awareness and imagination. A variety of professionals working in the discipline are here to share their voices throughout the week. We had a wonderful session on rendering on Monday, another exciting one on proposal design on Wednesday. Today is the last one in the series. I would like to take this opportunity and express my deep appreciation to those who made it happen. My co-producers, Rebecca Carbing and Nick Cloud, our technology coordinator, Lucia Wallace, graphic designer, Chris Lee, and of course, the team at the Valley Art Gallery for their ongoing support. And most importantly, the brilliant presenters and the moderators, David Rockby, Martin Canzadier, Vivian Lee, Chloe Catan, and David Turbone, Crystal Maury, and of course, the ones we're about to introduce for today's session. It has been a great pleasure to work with you all. I have learned a lot from you. Thank you. Today's topic is materiality and fabrication. In this webinar, artist Myfanwy MacLeod is going to speak with Catherine Machado, former Public Art Conservator for the City of Toronto, to reflect on the complexities of material choices and the fabrication processes in the design of public art projects. How is materiality thought about by artists? How does that differ from the conservative's role of preservation? Moreover, I think today's subject is particularly relevant and to the notion of monument, a contested field in our present culture, social, and political climate. I hope today's discussion can help us to imagine new critical ways to move forward. Just a quick note, if you have any questions during the presentations, please submit them to the Q&A box. There will be a dedicated Q&A period in today's session. Appreciate your patience. Now, with great pleasure, I'm going to introduce today's moderator, Jason Lujan. Jason Lujan is originally from Myfanwy, Texas. His 20-year career as an arts administrator includes work with the Dia Foundation, Museum of Modern Art, Frick Museum, Park Avenue Armory, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He has managed the productions and exhibitions by leading theater companies, museums, artists, and runway fashion installations for iconic brands. Jason is a practicing artist whose current work is about cultural leveling, how different cultures approach each other as a result of travel and communication, how culture is exported to other nations and communities, and later homogenized. Jason is one half of Native Art Department International. And okay, let me switch the camera and let's welcome Jason. Just give me a quick second. Okay.
Oh, there we are.
Okay,
great.
And here's Jason, and just let me disappear. Give me 1 second. Okay.
Thanks, Jan. So thank you everyone for making time today. We're of course interested in the topic of materiality and fabrication, visual imagination balanced with the reality of what works and doesn't in public art. This is an important subject, so I'm honored to be part of this conversation between Myfanwy and Catherine and hear them share what they know about this topic. And we'll also, of course, be taking questions from our virtual audience. If we look up the definition of materiality, you'll see it's often used to refer to the quality or character of matter, but it could also mean the quality of being relevant or significant. Public art implies public ownership. And right now, I think we're in a phase where public art seems to be judged exclusively on the basis of narratives attached to them. If the artist's intention does not necessarily determine the meaning of the artwork, how can understanding its material and technical process of its creation impact our interpretation? Not unlike human affairs, nature is also in a state of constant change. Things decay and fall apart. Born of an interest in heritage and recognition for preserving what may be irreplaceable is where we enter into conservation. In my experience, criteria for conservation are rarely well defined. So I'm curious where and how the line is drawn between limited restoration and total reproduction. So now I'll introduce our first presenter. Myfanwy MacLeod, born in London, Ontario, lives and works in Vancouver, BC. Often described as a second-generation and Vancouver conceptualist, MacLeod offers a feminist critique of imbalances of power through her long-standing interest in the issues which surround art in public spaces. Her work combines popular imagery with conceptual rigor, resulting in several permanent and temporary works in the public realm. And Myfanwy, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My video, okay. Hi there, Jason. Nice to be here. I'm gonna start the presentation. Share. Full screen. Can everyone see that? Someone just text me yes or no, please. For Frieze London 2017, Hauser and Wirth recreated a fictional Bronze Age presentation from a forgotten museum. Realized in collaboration with Mary Beard, Professor of Classics at the University of Cambridge, Bronze Age circa 3500 BC to 2017 AD, focuses solely on works made of bronze with artifacts on loan from international museums and private collections nationwide, featuring contemporary artists and miscellaneous bronze objects purchased from eBay, masquerading as archaeological finds. The exhibition later traveled to First Sight, an art gallery and cultural center in Colchester. According to the press release for the exhibition, the presentation moved away from the traditional white walls of an art fair and challenged expectations and highlighted the power of display. The power of display, or more aptly, the display of power, is something that is always at the forefront of my thinking. When making an artwork, or any artwork for that matter, there always needs to be a consideration of the cultural and historical implications of the material. Historically, bronze is a material associated with the ideas of power and the heroic. Bronze also implies a timelessness and permanence, but as our values change over time, those who we once honored and with bronze statues are pulled down or covered up. So what does it mean to use bronze today? How do we process or challenge the narratives associated with this material? What are the limits of choosing to work in figurative bronze sculpture? I have used bronze in my public artwork not only for pragmatic reasons, for its strength and durability, but also to challenge expectation, question displays of power as a woman and a feminist working in the public realm. The lady pictured here is a bronze statue of a camel commissioned for a private developer in North Vancouver in 2017 and is based on the story of caribou camels. Camels were imported to work as pack animals during the caribou gold rush, although not successfully, so they were eventually put out to pasture. The lady is a representation of the last caribou camel. One of the challenges of working in public art is, unlike equestrian monuments of the past, which were erected by men in power, public artworks today are for the most part decided by juries. I would say the lady is, or embodies, an expression, is an embodiment of the expression that the camel is a horse designed by committee. This is a commission, the birds, from 2010. I chose bronze for the feet of my first commission because the budget didn't allow for the entire work to be cast, but more importantly, I am haunted by the specter of destruction or removal. This is the tilted arc, pictured before and after it was moved from the Jacob Javits Plaza in New York in the 90s. I won the commission in 2008, which was 5 years after the invasion of Iraq, when images of statues of Saddam Hussein being pulled down during the American invasion were circulating. I recently came across this story about a man. in the UK trying to auction off a piece of the statue which came from Saddam's buttocks. In a strange twist, the Iraqi government is trying to stop the sale, claiming it is cultural property and was illegally removed. I have been interested in figurative bronze sculpture, and in particular its absence from contemporary art. But I'd had my first taste of bronze and was hooked. Bronze is the Gucci of materials. Primrose, pictured here, was based on the true story of a donkey that appeared in the news as an upbeat animal to the end of a bitter day. I came across it in 2012, and it stayed with me. When I was shortlisted for a commission at Bay and St. Joseph, I decided to create a bronze sculpture. The context is equally important and makes a setting for the sort of materiality, and sort of can heighten this. This piece in particular is located next to St. Basil's Church and at the entrance to St. Michael's College, which was the home to Marshall McLuhan during his career, as well as the Pontifical Institute for Medieval Studies. This is Primrose, the original Primrose. The rendering, she is part of a trilogy of sculptures that include the birds and the lady, a part of my sculptural bestiary. I'd like to show a few fabrication images for you. The making of large bronze sculptures is very much a collective endeavor. I could not do this without the team that I work with in Calgary, and nor the people who helped to install it and everyone else around me. This is the sort of original piece that you can see, which we made cast form. Here is it in bronze. Working in bronze necessitates a sort of piecemeal approach in a way. Depending on the size of the fonderie, it's very difficult to cast an entire piece, especially at this scale. And so we are sort of piecing the work together, welding it to create a whole. The piece is then transported from Calgary to Toronto and craned into place where it was installed last October. The work wasn't unwrapped at the time because the park was unfinished. Here is my team helping with their tools, men vacuuming. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we were unable to do an official unveiling, which I think is for the best. I'm not fond of ceremonies, and it spared me a humiliation that It was instead unwrapped by the contractors who are still working on the park on site, and someone from the city of Toronto who oversaw to make sure no damage had happened over the winter. I'd like to end with an installation, or a shot taken during the installation. One of the guys from the company who we'd hired locally to help with the installation asked me if I could take his photo while sitting on the donkey to send to his girlfriend. To me, this is the only kind of man I want to see on a horse. Thank you.
Thank you, Myfanwy. That was an amazing presentation. I've written down some notes and we'll get to those during our discussion, but I guess I'd like to move on and introduce our next presenter. Catherine Machado is a Toronto-based conservator with a specialty in public art conservation. She graduated from the Fleming College Cultural Heritage Conservation and Management Program and interned at the Canadian Conservation Institute in Ottawa. She specializes in public art conservation treatments, disaster recovery of art collections, and maintenance of municipal public art collections, largely with the City of Toronto's Public Art and Monuments Collection. I'm looking forward to what she has to say. Take it away, Catherine.
Hi, thank you so much, Jason. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Okay, so the material choice is one of the most important facets to producing public art, and it defines the way artwork is maintained. The material choices that artists choose in tandem with fabrication techniques and to a lesser extent locations informs how a conservator approaches treatment or restoration of damage. But I will admit it's a learning process and it's an evolution. New materials, finishes, and technologies are being developed every year. Public art conservators have to constantly adapt and be willing to collaborate with artists and with specialists in unique fields to develop treatment plans that respect the integrity of the artist's vision while also being a sustainable solution. So I'm just going to run through a couple of just kind of standard material choices that we'll see a lot of in public art collections, as well as emerging and becoming more popular material choices right now, and I believe it'll be a continued trend in the future. So this is a piece, Garden of Future Follies. It's made of bronze. This is located in Toronto. All of the pieces I'm going to show are going to be from the city of Toronto. This piece is interesting because the artist wanted it to develop age and to kind of express what it has been susceptible to by the environment, and that includes urine, dog urine to be specific. So, which is an interesting chemical reaction. Uric acid in urine turns bronze patina teal, and so that you can see quite evidently. But the artists wanted that; they were fine with that evidence, and that's interesting because as a conservator you fight that because that is not something, that's not how it was originally looked, that's not the way it should look. But the artists were very adamant. They're like, no, that's the way we want it to show what it's been through. And that's something we always have ongoing with artists. What kind of vandalism is acceptable? Is this considered vandalism? And what is something that it doesn't compromise your artistic vision. This is a piece titled Echo by Marianne Barkhouse and Michael Belmore. The previous piece was by Hadley and Maxwell. This piece is made of granite and bronze. Now with this piece in particular, those are, that's the bread and butter of a lot of public art collections. It's, it's tried and true, it's steady, and we know it'll last. But what's interesting with this piece is it was a perfect storm because so the material choice was, we knew it would last, but the issue was the fabrication technique. So the adhesive used with the original adhesive that was used in combination with the length of the rods at the bottom to secure the four squirrels wasn't sufficient enough. So we had an act of vandalism where someone somehow managed to pry one of the squirrels out and stole it. Now a kind Samaritan, we're not sure who, managed to return the squirrel, and we were able to reunite him with the rest of his friends, and we were able to rectify the adhesive for all the other squirrels, as well as lengthen the length of the threaded rods below, so it wouldn't happen again. This piece, Reticulated Gamble, is a functioning playground. Now, the fabrication technique for this one was pure good intentions because it was powder coated steel, and that's a technique that's often used in industrial settings as to last. But the thing is an industrial setting is not in a public setting. Specifically with public art pieces, they have to be able to withstand exposure to solvents and chemicals and pressure washing, because unfortunately a lot of our pieces receive vandalism. And so now we're seeing the results of repeated water, rain, pressure washing, chemical use. And unfortunately we can't touch up powder coated paint. So the whole artwork needs to be completely stripped and repainted using a different technique. But that's something we learn as we go, because, you know, this was something that 10 years ago, a lot of public art fabricators, that was their go-to, because, you know, we would hear that it was built to last. This technique was built to last. This is the Maple Leaf Trellis by De Markersman. This piece we're seeing, this has both painted steel and weathering steel. We see a lot of use of Corten steel, which is another word for weathering steel. It's the brown steel of the trunk of the trees. Now with this, it's a lot of artists like to use it because it reflects the environment, but is also very stable, and it develops quite a beautiful patina, this gorgeous rust colored patina. Now, because it takes a while to develop its patina, and it needs to be exposed to the elements to develop that patina, we get a lot of runoff with the rain, and we see a lot of staining in the surrounding areas. I have seen artists leverage that runoff and are able to convert it into more artwork in the surrounding areas, which is fantastic. This, you see a little bit of staining in the corner, and that's only after 1 year. So, you know, as the years go by, that's something that we have to include in our maintenance plan to make sure that we're able to mitigate that staining. This is a piece by Noel Harding titled Elevated Wetlands. So this is an interesting piece because it also includes the neighboring Don River. There's a pump system that pumps in water and is brought to the top of these pods, and the water will trickle down from one pod to another, watering all the plantings in each pod, and then will eventually come out into a small little pond. Now, this piece is interesting because we're also dealing with living organic matter, and that is something that we have to make sure that as a public art conservator that we're on top on, because living you know, plants die, and so that's something that it's a high maintenance piece for sure, and that's something that was made very clear at the beginning when this piece was accepted into the collection. And so the next two pieces are what we know to be very, it's going to be very important because we live in the digital age, where we're going to see a lot of use of technology. With this piece, Nyctophilia, and the next one, Octa, so Octa uses audio, and Nyctophilia uses lighting, and both use programming to showcase the artwork and to function. Now, the thing that we're seeing going forward is, as everyone knows with a cell phone, data, you know, everything is changing. Technology is changing so quickly, and software is changing. And so the software, when it comes to programming these pieces, these artworks, as well as just even the light bulbs, we have to constantly make sure that they are compatible with each other. And that means either data migration, upgrades, even the codes. These artists are still involved with these pieces today because there is conversations there where who owns the code to keep these pieces functioning. Do the artists have the copyright there? Does the owners of the pieces, are they the ones to be able to hold on to that code? And what happens if the artist passes away? Does that knowledge about how to keep the pieces working die with them, or is there a plan in place where we're able to transfer that knowledge? And that's something that that conversation is going to become more and more relevant as we're seeing more and more pieces come into our collections that utilize, you know, audio, lighting, programming, that sort of stuff. yeah, so I'm really excited to dig in and to talk with Myfanwy about all these topics.
Great, thank you. Let's wait for Myfanwy to get on screen here, and we'll start our conversation.
Oh,
We have about 20 minutes for us to have a quick conversation. I'd like to ask you about two specific things I heard during each of your presentations, and then around 4 o'clock, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, do me a favor and kind of walk me through the process of determining materials, both as an artist, but also as a person who needs to manage and take care of them. Maybe what the committees are involved, what the conversation might be, or the arguments involved for using a particular material, and maybe weigh in a little bit on your feelings or your opinions on where the responsibility lies for the well-being of this material. Does that make sense?
yeah.
And I'll just open that up and you two can just have at it.
Well, from a fabrication point of view, I think so much of it is determined by the budget. And it's like, what can we afford? And what are the expectations of the person who's commissioning? I'm trying always, I think, over the past 10 years with, having made multiple pieces, to avoid, upkeep as much as possible, because it's true. It's just like I'm still dealing with issues around, damage or done by people. And so each piece has become a sort of like learning curve where it's just like, the birds taught me that, people will climb and skateboard and like BMX bike all over, 16 to 20 foot like birds, that's, which has made them incredibly popular, but also they've suffered. So they had to be remade in 2018, I believe. So originally the feet were bronze, but the actual body of them was made in a sort of like resin hard coat with a sort of EPS foam underneath. But after that started to fail after 8 years. So we just kind of like, the city of Vancouver was incredibly supportive about that, I think, because of their popularity, and agreed to recast them in aluminum. But even that, it's like they've still continued to suffer damage, just because people will be people. So I think the piece that we did after that, it was a collaboration with another artist we did in concrete, and we actually built that whole idea about engagement with the piece and how people will engage with the piece. And so they're actually like, it's a play park using these play sculptures riffing on sort of mid-century modern playgrounds, and works by sort of people like Henry Moore, Barbara Hepworth, and also, Noguchi as well. So I think there is a lot of, thinking about, like I just did a sort of visit with another piece that had been damaged, was made of aluminum, a 1/4 inch aluminum, and someone managed to rip the head off, or the hat off one of it. And it's sort of like, so now we're trying to figure out if we relocate it to a different place, will that prevent damage? So I think it's sort of like you're trying to, imagine like, in a way, the worst possible kind of scenario.
That's basically my whole job. Is I'm oftentimes, well, they'll be able to light this on fire, or this might happen here, we need more lighting, that kind of stuff. I'm dealing with something right now where someone tried to light an architectural folly on fire, and so just because. And so luckily it was made of stone, so it survived. But I've also separately been dealing with a piece that was made of fiberglass that someone also tried to burn. And so because fiberglass is fiberglass, it made the damage was massive. It was just melted. It smelled like melted plastic. And so again, people will, if there is a will, there is a way, unfortunately, and we can only do as much as we possibly can to mitigate damage. And sometimes that's even relocating. I've had to do that in the past too, where we've had to relocate a piece because it's just the vandalism was relentless.
I think one of the things with the donkey, it's just like, you can see there's 2 casts on it. And part of my thinking was people like graffiti, And it's sort of like the tradition is you sign a cast, and it's sort of like, it's also like building in, it's like, oh, actually people, this giving people a place to do their thing, but containing it in a way. So it's sort of like, it was the same thing with the sort of skateboarding. So the city kind of like put in some of these benches and stuff that they could use to sort of do their little jumps, but also in the end would protect the birds from getting more damage to them. So I think it's like trying to think about like solutions to, you know, you can't always anticipate what everyone's going to say, but it's like you try.
So with Primrose, so you're basically, so the vandalism is okay. The graffiti on the cast is encouraged.
Yeah, it's sort of like, so it's not like I'm saying, please vandalize my sculpture, but I'm thinking it's sort of like, it's a way to engage with the work that it wouldn't be as problematic, because I think it's sort of like, it would then look as if it was intentional, because I think that's what happens with casts, right? It's like people sign them, they put their names to them. And it's like, so it's like trying to think about like, how, you know, think around how people will behave.
So this is a really good chance to talk about the acceptable level of damage. And I think it was one of the things that I've been on the side of the institution where you deal with patinas, where the artist accepts, you know, the artist visualizes a certain effect. And then of course that effect begins to take shape, which is then rejected either by the institution or by the public because it doesn't quite pan out. Can you give me some stories, I mean, besides dog urine, about where you may have thought about these kinds of things, and how you've negotiated between the public going, this looks terrible, and the artist going, this looks wonderful?
So we see that a lot with bronze, where some artists love the patina on a bronze, that teal, that, you know, that copper color, whereas the public will see it as we're not taking care of it. Mm-hmm. But the artist wanted to develop that kind of patina. So in cases like that, we try to defer to the artist and the artist's original vision. And with that, we go about educating the public, either through, you know, through signage or through programming, where we said, no, this is what the artist wants, and this is the reason why. Because, you know, they wanted to show the effect of the climate on the piece. That sort of stuff. I've dealt with in the past with some artists being okay with, because they'll have a piece that has just like a pole, and then up top will be the artwork, and they're okay with stickers, you know, little tiny, you know, signatures, you know, tiny pieces of graffiti, and they're okay with that. And so we got calls from, you know, there's graffiti, there's stickers on this artwork, why aren't you taking care of it? And sometimes the stickers and the graffiti will never end. It will be ongoing. So sometimes, even though it is accepted by the artist, we'll go in and have stickers removed or graffiti removed, because we know it'll start to develop again. There is a fine line. We have to make sure that we keep the artist happy, but we also have to make sure that things look presentable.
So there'll be a lot of managing those casts, I imagine.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like it's a little bit like lawns that are mown and unmown lawns, right? In like a suburban neighborhood. It's like some people really want the sort of lawn that's like pristine, and then there's some people who are like okay with a few dandelions, and then there's the other people who are just like where their lawn is like crazy. And it's just like, I think it's just like, you know, as an artist, it's like I'm kind of like more towards like, I like the sort of patina because I think it shows the kind of engagement. But I think there is acceptable levels. Like we put a film over top of the birds to protect the paint job from the UV rays, because eventually also that sort of degrades, and it's like it started peeling off. And that just looks shitty. So you're kind of like, oh, not really keen on that.
There is actually one, I'm gonna go out of turn here, because we actually got an interesting question from our virtual audience that ties into this, and I don't want to go back and forth, but the question is, has there been an instance where graffiti or public interaction with the work has strengthened it, and who typically decides what graffiti to keep and what to remove?
I'm trying to think of an example. So offensive graffiti is automatically removed. That's you know, that's a no-brainer for sure. I think with Primrose, Myfanwy's piece, I think that is only going to enhance the piece. I really do, because it's interactive. It's, you know, people can see it involves the public in a very specific and unique way, which I think will only bring really good attention. I can't really recall right now of a piece in particular where vandalism has made it better off.
Yeah.
Myfanwy, what do you think? Do you have,
I can only think of like more historical things where you have like a bronze piece and the patina is like applied, right? It's an acidic sort of bath that they subject the bronze to. And it's sort of like, and it's, if you touch it enough, the sort of like oils in your hands will actually rub away that patina. And then what you'll get is that kind of gold popping through. So you have a lot of historical kind of, you know, sort of bronze, like more in Europe kind of thing, where someone has touched it so much, it's got like this kind of gold sort of like highlight. And I think it's like that to me is sort of like something that kind of enhances the piece, because it shows a kind of like a love in a way, because it's like and it's like a lot of times it's like, oh, they touch it for good luck, you know, that kind of thing. And to me, that's sort of like, I think it sort of makes the piece better. But, you know, the artist who was like, you know, dead for 300 years might have a different viewpoint on that. Who knows?
Ah, I see. Okay. Well, there's actually a lot of chatter about this, but unfortunately, maybe we'll circle back around when we do the full audience Q&A. But I wanted to talk about one other thing for the last few minutes. I'd like to have you hear your comments about, I have the note here that says design by committee and care by committee. And as an artist who deals with public art, Myfanwy, obviously you deal with committees, and art making is considered a compromise from the minute it's conceptualized, any kind of artwork, right? It's never exactly what you envision in your brain. So it would be interesting to hear some anecdotes on your end about having to negotiate your vision through a committee to a point where it's accepted. And then also, in, Catherine, with the conservation, we kind of talked about committee a little bit with graffiti and what's acceptable, but maybe some other approaches where there's some disagreement, or where different kinds of experts weigh in on different levels, and maybe cost incentives and those kinds of things.
So for me, I guess sort of like the first committee situation I had to deal with was on my first commission, which was the birds. So originally I actually proposed something completely different. It was, you know, it was a piece that was commissioned during the Olympics or for the Olympics. And so they wanted the piece to relate to the Olympics. And so I proposed 5 sort of large tree stumps mimicking the sort of 5 Olympic rings that would sit in the plaza. And they were going to be like old growth trees, kind of 15 feet high and like sort of 30 feet across. Well, sort of the jury made the selection. And then there was like this big brouhaha, and I cannot remember who it was, but someone stirred the pot. Might have been the developer. They were really concerned about the scale of it within the plaza. And so at this point, I hadn't even signed a contract. The public art consultant asked me if I would agree to refine the sort of like proposal and then also do a second proposal, something completely different that didn't have to relate to the idea about the Olympics. And so actually the birds was the second proposal. And it's like they brought back the developer, the parks board, anyone that was involved, and one member from the original jury to look at the 2 proposals and make this kind of decision. And it was incredibly stressful, because it was just like, there were so many things that kind of happened in that, you know, and eventually it was sort of like, we decided the birds. I think it was because I realized that sort of financially, it was actually the first piece that I proposed was not really that viable. And the second was that it was always a thing that was the first thing that popped into my head, was to do something about birds in that plaza. But because they were, the sort of like city had this brief that sort of said, oh, you know, it has to be about the Olympics, and it has to, you know, you're trying to sort of like, I think that's always the trickiest part at the beginning, when people are dictating or giving you thematics that they want you to work towards. Because it's just like, you know, you start to feel like you're doing a social studies project for grade 6 or something, where it's like, oh, the theme is democracy. And so I should, you know, how do I represent democracy? And it sort of really kind of shuts down the process in a way. So it can be incredibly stressful. But I think in the end, it's sort of that process also then made a better work, because it's less tied to this very transient event of the sort of Olympics, which I was never behind anyway. So hate to say it.
Has anything ever, have you ever looked at it like an RFP that's just overly prescriptive and just gone like, yeah, no way, I'm not going to do that?
Yeah. Or I've tried to kind of accommodate in my whatever way, but it always kind of falls flat. So yeah, I've made some really bad proposals over the top of the years, just because it's like I couldn't get my mind around like what they were asking for. So,
Catherine, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so because working for an institution like, let's say, a municipality, there are a lot of people you have to consult before you execute any sort of restoration. Restoration is different than maintenance. Maintenance is just maintaining what is there and just, maintaining the state of the piece, whereas restoration means alteration in a way that will alter the visual impact of the piece, if that makes more sense. We had a piece at the City of Toronto where it was I feel like a broken record here, but it was like a magnet for graffiti. And so it was just so relentless that we realized in order to take better care of this piece, we would have to physically alter the surface. And that meant impacting the integrity of the piece, and that meant consulting with the artist. And because that is, copyright, that is the artist's work. And so we reached out to him and said, this is the situation. This is how, we have a couple of ways we can go about this. Which way would you prefer? And ultimately he agreed that this would be the best for the piece, and for the piece to survive and look the way it is and make it easier to maintain. But sometimes when we have to go about, let's say, doing a deinstallation. So if a piece needs to go into, needs to be removed and shipped off for restoration, we need to have consultation with the public, with, let's say, municipal counselors, with, parks and recreation, with transportation. It's public art within a municipality is always a collaboration. Okay. It is not just, let's say, the conservator or the public art officers. It's always a collaboration.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thanks. So before we open it up, I have one last thing, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on when we think about public art, or when I think about public art, there seems to be the notion that it's designed, or it's supposed to, or it's expected to last forever. Can you give me, from a materials perspective, or from just an ideas perspective, let's talk about, do you think public art should last forever? Should there be an end date, built-in obsolescence? What are your opinions on those kinds of things?
For me, I think that when I showed the example of the birds and just the feet, I always had it in my mind. I think because, when I was at an undergrad at art school, that was during the time that the Richard Serra piece was being, removed, and there was a lot of controversy around it. And so I always have this thing in my head that it's sort of like things don't last forever. And there might be an apocalypse. And so, so I thought there's sort of like, or some pyroclastic blast like in Pompeii or something, and that nothing would be left except for the feet of the birds. So which is why I like bronze, because it's sort of like, it does have a tendency to sort of like endure in some form or another. But I do think that, we can see that it's sort of like, our values change over time. And, so what's important for one generation is not necessarily important for the next generation. And it's a very difficult sort of like, sort of balance to sort of like, like, because you don't want to sort of like erase the history, so to speak, because, you know, it doesn't change that it happened, but it's sort of like, how do you then incorporate that? I was doing a focus group yesterday with a bunch of artists working in the public realm, and First Nations artist Deborah Sparrow was talking about, there's a piece in front of City Hall of Captain Vancouver, and she was saying, you know, which you would expect from someone who's Indigenous, that, you know, this would be very problematic. But she was saying, you know, her understanding was that Captain Vancouver was actually on the side of the Indigenous people. And so she wanted not necessarily to remove that sculpture, but to add to it in a way that sort of like addressed, you know, the sort of like the presence and the peoples of like this, the sort of the unceded territories. So, you know, it's interesting, I think, you know, because you have to sort of balance everybody's kinds of, I think one of the reasons I also showed Kehinde Wiley's piece, The Rumors of War, which was just installed in 2019 of the man on the horse, but he's recast the sort of like traditional figure as a sort of Black American, is, to me, as a woman, it's just like, it's still a dude on a horse. So it's just like, you know, it's still heroic in a way that I think is problematic. And so I'm kind of, you know, how do we build monuments that celebrate other things, you know, the sort of maybe the more mundane, the more everyday, the sort of like the unsung heroes, you know, something, but that is not as easy a sell, I think, in a public realm sort of space, you know.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you with just recontextualizing pieces and giving them new life, and, you know, making it open to different kinds of interpretation, for sure. I am of the belief that not all public art has to be permanent, because, as you know, the public art is meant to serve, it is meant for the public, and so it is often a product of its time. And so if there's a way, if, you know, sentiments change, perspectives change later on, and there's a way that we can reinterpret it and make it able to serve the ideals of at that time, then I am all for it. I do think that there is, we always talk about permanent public art, but I do think temporary public art can be just as effective and can maybe even better serve the public, although, you know, it's a snapshot in time. And I think you can do a lot more with temporary public pieces than you can with permanent public art.
Great, thanks. I think it's time we took it to questions from the audience. And I was looking here at the sidebar, and there seemed to be a few questions that are asking kind of the same question. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read a few of them off to both of you, and then I'll let you pick it up from there to review. So some of these, does the maintenance plan need to be included in the initial proposal or budget from the artist? That's one. Number two, where does the cost of repairing vandalized pieces come from? Is there a separate budget allocated, or does it come from the artist's budget? And third, let me find it here. Something about whenever you write in your proposal, do you need to include the care and feeding of the artwork? So it sounds like there's some questions from artists who want some more insight on that process.
So it depends with the institution, right? I know for the City of Toronto that they provide a maintenance manual to the artist after, I believe it's after installation. Myfanwy, what's the timeline on that?
Basically, after the piece is installed, you have to sign over the deed of ownership to the city, and then you include with that a maintenance manual that tells people how to take care of the piece, what it involves, what it was manufactured from, you know, where to get the parts, as much information as you could possibly give so that they can care for it. And lots of places, like for example, with the City of Vancouver, with the birds, they actually, the total artwork budget, they took off $100,000 from the initial artwork budget and put it aside for maintenance. And then they did that for another piece. So a lot of times they will, you know, within civic pieces, they will, in Vancouver anyway, they will put aside, you know, funds for the maintenance of the piece, you know, for the future kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then if it's a private development, it's actually belongs to the strata. So a lot of the pieces that you see in front of condominiums, they are owned by the strata and they are responsible for the maintenance. And so this is a real challenge because sometimes they don't want to do that. Yeah. Because it's like they're already paying strata fees, and it's just like, you know, you're having to worry about your roof and your balcony and heating, and it's like the last thing you want to do is take care of some piece of art that you may or may not like. So I know that that's been a bit of a challenge, and you know, there's much discussion about moral rights of artists around, you know, the removal of pieces as well.
Yeah, with the percentage, I guess it must vary from municipality to municipality, that it just comes out of the overall project budget. But that's of a more recent move. I know with pieces that have been in the collection, you know, 50, 60 years, at the time there was no percentage of the budget to go towards maintenance. Yeah. The municipality has an operating budget that they have every single year that goes towards the maintenance and restoration of those pieces to care for them.
Has there ever been an instant that you can remember where there was pushback or maybe cutbacks and a situation where it's like, look, we can't afford to take care of this anymore?
Yeah, so there was one piece in particular that the cost to restore the piece would have just been too much to justify, and that just because it was falling apart from within. It was just the materials were just not compatible anymore, and it was just completely falling apart. And so that's something where we consulted the artist and asked for their input on how their thoughts and feelings, and we consulted with, you know, various other groups, and the consensus was that it might be best to deinstall the piece. And in that case, the artist expressed an interest in you know, reclaiming ownership. I'm sorry, and so we were able to deinstall the piece and ship it back to them. Mm. And they were able to do. I believe they installed it on their property, and give it a very honorable death, which I thought was very touching.
That's interesting. So there's several questions about materials, so I'll kind of lump these together. Can you both, using your vast expertise, recommend some materials other than bronze, and are there options for colors? Oftentimes, I think with a lot of RFPs, we just talked a little bit about permanence and the Gucci of materials, you know, which are super durable, low maintenance. But there are some artists where color is a really big part of their work. And do you have any experience or recommendations for materials that are very colorful, but also very durable and low maintenance? You know, what's your alchemical secret?
I suggest painted steel or painted aluminum, 100%. Not use a powder coated technique, to use just either a brush on or spray application with the paint, because it's easy to do touch-ups, and it's easy to strip, you know, in the event that it gets, you know, the paint is flaking pretty badly, we're able to just strip it and then repaint it quite easily.
Yeah, I've got some pieces in aluminum that have been painted. I have we did some concrete, actually GFRC, which is glass fiber reinforced concrete that is painted as well, which is a sort of fairly hardy. I mean, we're planning, because it's sort of like, it's got quite a complicated sort of painted surface, that, you know, in the future, once that starts to wear away, that I think it would be very difficult to replicate on site. And I think that's part of the problems. It's like having to actually do the repairs on site, because it's like with the birds, we had to actually remove them send them to Calgary. They had to do repairs on them there, and then they had to ship them to China to be cast in aluminum, and then shipped back to be painted in Calgary, and then shipped to Vancouver. So it became a bit of a process. With the pieces that are made of concrete, we're coming up with a plan to paint them in solid colors that we will choose and give to the sort of like people. So they have that for the future. So it's like, at least we have some input now. I'm also doing a piece right now in mosaic, which is also an incredibly durable sort of material. Like, I think it's just like basically as durable as you possibly can within whatever budget. And sometimes that means, you know, adjusting the scale of something, or just thinking a little bit like in terms of like how to place it. So maybe smaller scale, but on a large plinth or something, so that you just have, you know, it's so dependent on the budget, right? It's just like everything's about the money, guys. I hate to think.
Myfanwy, with regards to the concrete, that paint, did you mix the pigment into the concrete, or are you just applying it on the outside?
No, it's applied on the outside.
Oh, thank gosh. Thank you. Yeah, it is so hard to repair concrete that has the pigment mixed into it.
Well,
It's a nightmare.
That was one of the things too. It's just like, because we had money left over in the budget from the playtime sculptures, that we were talking about doing these cast concrete benches that were kind of act as a signage for them. And, you know, I talked to, because it's like, I think part of the thing is when you're making public stuff, you get to talk to a lot of guys who make stuff. And the contractor, who poured the foundations for the work, basically told us, oh, you know, concrete, pigmented sculpture, that concrete, it fades over time. It's just like, so, you know, and it doesn't take very long, to be honest. So it's way better just to paint something, because then you the color, you know, it's just a much better scenario for everyone around.
That way you can just go in, retouch, and in case, you know, it gets dinged, they can do the patch and then just repaint all over, and then it looks fresh. Yeah.
Yeah. You talked about painting concrete, but what's the preferred paint for metal?
There's quite a few different paint systems.
The coating or the system, yeah.
So it just depends on, you know, the area, the location, to be honest. So if I've dealt with so many paint systems I've seen paint systems that are used for boats. I've seen paint systems that were used for cars. I've seen so many of them, and honestly, they have, you know, different durabilities, and in the end, it will need to get touched up regardless. And so as long as it's something that can be relatively easily sourced, and like I mentioned, it's just kind of just brush on, rolled on, or spray application, then
Catherine, maybe you can explain the difference between a powder coated steel and just a painted steel.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So thank you. That's a very good question. So powder coated steel, the pigment is suspended in a resin, and then it's applied on top of the steel, and it's put into an oven, and the oven melts it and forms a very uniform and very thin layer, and that's how it adheres to. So it's completely spread, and there's no imperfections or ways for moisture to get under. So it's a very uniform, and it has if you touch it, it has like a very fine, grainy texture. But the issue with that is that when you can't touch it up, so it needs to be completely stripped. The whole piece needs to be completely stripped, removed off-site, and that way, because it needs to go back into the oven to get that new layer of paint on it.
I've dealt with artists using powder coated to make furniture and desks, and that never works out.
It never works out for anyone.
So there's some couple of questions from Myfanwy. So someone's asking, this is also transferable to the conservation side. What questions do you ask a fabricator before agreeing to work together on a project, and how do you define a good fabricator? Conversely, Catherine, when you're not the one out there with a toothbrush scrubbing something down, how do you vet your conservators and their approaches, or are these just straight contractors? It looks like people are asking for more information on the facilitating part.
For me, it's just like I basically, I used to work with one company. The birds were made by one company.
Which company? Can you say that?
No, probably not a good idea. But then the guys who actually did the work for the company left and went and made their own company. So that's the company that I work with now. Because I did 3 projects with the first original company, and there was issues. I think it was like, it's mostly, I have to say, it's about communication and also, you know, it's attention to detail. And it's just like the guys I'm working with now are incredible. They're really great to work with. They, you know, they're super anal and probably way more than I even am. And they're great about, you know, having an open conversation. So I haven't actually had any problem. And I think that's the thing. It's like you find a good fabricator, you continue to work with them, because it's like you're building this relationship, and it's like you get to know and understand, you know, all of this, because it is collaborative. It's not just me saying, you do this, you know, it's like a back and forth constant about from, you know, like design stage to the sort of end, and coming up with solutions, creative solutions about how to make things. So I think that's the best sort of like, you know, approach, is trying to find someone that, you know, that you can work with.
What red flags do you have in your experience when dealing with fabricators? It sounds like you found someone reliable and dependable that you're going to stick with, but I'm sure there was a point in time early on where you were basically having to start from zero. Can you walk us through some of that process and some of the thoughts and, you know, lessons learned?
Well, I think the first company I worked with was recommended by the public art consultant that was on the project for the city of Vancouver, saying they were great to work with and everything. And initially they were great, but it's sort of like, you know, it's like a marriage. It's like once the honeymoon phase is over, it becomes about like, if there's a problem, do they take ownership for that problem? And when we did the playtime sculptures, there was issues with the sort of surface. Like we wanted the surface to be quite tactile because it's concrete, and we didn't mind, you know, some, you know, sort of like, I don't know what you would call it, sort of like the texture of the hand, that kind of thing. But there were so many deficiencies with it. And when I actually sort of talked to them about the sort of deficiencies, the guy was just basically just kind of dismissed it out of hand. And then when I sent him, like, and then in conjunction with the sort of like client, when we sent him photographs of all this problems, then he admitted, oh yeah. But it was just like, you know, we just kind of like were worried that the piece would sort of like start to, you know, disintegrate, because it's like they had cracks, and it's like the water, I think part of the problem was that like it hadn't dried properly before they put on the paint. And so the paint started to bubble underneath, you know, as the moisture started to weep out. And it's just like, you know, this is an issue. And I think that was the red flag, you know, and it had happened on an earlier project, which I didn't show, which was for a gallery situation. And it was just kind of like, it was just a bit of a, you know, no one sort of taking any ownership, and no one also like, and shifting the blame, you know, it's just like, you know, kind of grow up, and it's just like, admit when there's a problem. I think that's the biggest, you know, red flag. If someone can't do that, then it's going to be really difficult to work with them in the long run. And I've had like, you know, just real experiences where it's like, especially as a woman, I think this happens quite a bit, where you approach somebody about doing something, and they're kind of quite, they can be really patronizing and kind of incredibly rude. And you're just like, well, I don't want to work with someone who's going to treat me like this before you've even started work for me, you know? So, you know, when you find someone, I've recommended the guys that I work with to everybody I know. So it's just like, you know, which is good and bad.
No, I've definitely encountered that, where as a woman, most of my contractors are men. And so sometimes that red flag is where they're patronizing to you, as if you don't know what you're talking about. And you said, well, I do know what I'm talking about. And just, you know, just dismissive, or another red flag is budget. If the budget is suspiciously cheap, that's when I know, that's when I'm like, there's something wrong here. If all of your competitors are quoting me one specific, like a very specific range, and you are very cheap, there's something not right here. And then oftentimes that'll lead to, oh, excuses, or lack of ownership of mistakes in the fabrication, and then it's just a recipe for disaster.
I totally agree with this sort of like under budget thing, because that's what happened with the first project with the birds. They were super under budget. It was sort of like so I had like, I think, you know, $150,000 under budget when I finished that project. But then 8 years later, it failed. And so it's like, we could have actually, you know, done it in a different material and not had the problems that we did. But they're trying to sort of like, and then there was also the situation where there's upcharging too. So like every time there was like a, you know, you want to sort of like make a change, and there wasn't very many initially, but it's sort of like, you know, when they start saying, well, it's going to cost more for this and it's going to cost more for that, and they start sort of like, you know, adding stuff on, and then it's just like, you know, it's just like any kind of sort of fabrication of anything, you know, you just have to be really careful. And I didn't know that at the time, obviously, because it was my first project, but I think it's like, you know, over time you recognize, it's like, you know, oh yeah, this is why I don't want to work with you anymore.
Yeah, with a lot of restoration projects, we have contingency built in. And sometimes if we're trying out a new contractor, they'll make excuses to dip into that contingency. You said, well, you should have budgeted this without the contingency. Like, I understand if there's issues with, you know, something didn't arrive in time, or someone, you know, someone vandalized a piece while it was in the middle of restoration, and you need a budget for an extra day to deal with that. Like that, I understand. Like, those are unforeseen circumstances. But if you forgot to buy a couple cans of paint and you need to dip into the contingency, that's unacceptable. Big red flag.
All these anecdotes are triggering the PTSD from my life in New York, with having to deal with a lot of these kinds of contractor shenanigans. So I'm going to try to change it up. There's another question here that's asking about, with the increasing incorporation of new technology in public art and the ongoing need to upgrade probably some of the other things attached to it, like lighting components and other things like that. Are these written into contracts, and what is the overall responsibility by the artist in making sure that these are honored later?
So from my understanding, upgrades are not included in the contract. That falls under the purview of the conservator. Mm-hmm. And it is a challenge for sure. I will be honest, I don't have a background in, you know, electrical engineering or computer programming, and that's something I have to reach out to contractors about. And, you know, I learn as I go, but sometimes you just have to depend on good quality contractors to advise when certain things need upgrades, or, you know, there's this product on the market this certain light bulb that will last twice as long as the one that's currently installed. And, you know, it might be, you know, triple the amount of money, but it will be worth it because it'll save you, you know, X amount of dollars down the road. And, you know, stuff like that, where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's something you need to engage with professionals on, and collaborate with them, and sometimes collaborate with the artists and say, what would you be open to using a different software? And that's included in the maintenance manual, those kinds of questions. And you know, whether they want to keep with a certain, you know, certain processing software, you know, who would they suggest as a go-to person to handle the, you know, the maintenance of the piece going forward. Mm.
I myself just avoid technology at all costs, because I know it breaks down. And I think that extends to lighting, because it's always one of the things that, you know, is included in a brief. It's just like, and, you know, when you're proposing, they're always like, well, what about the lighting? So I paid $25,000 for lighting the birds, and the lights have never worked. So, and I kind of went, you know what, I realized also through the process that there's so much ambient light in, you know, the city that is so unnecessary. And it's just like, it's just more light pollution. So I really try, I always discourage it. There's really no need for it. I mean, you'd be better off just getting a bunch of Noma lights and sticking it around the base than to sort of like invest in that kind of, you know, process, because at least you know that there's going to be Noma lights down at like the Home Depot kind of thing, right? So I think it's just like, for me, it's just like, you know, why like the bronze is in the sort of like, you know, the least trouble, the better kind of thing. Because it's also like, it's a pain for me to constantly have to sort of worry about upgrading things down the line and stuff. I mean, even just my own computer, it's just like.
Yeah, I hear you. So we have time for one more question. And the question is for each of you. Myfanwy, is there a material out there that, I mean, we've been very practical during this conversation because we needed to be, but what material out there are you really curious about? And that given, if there was an opportunity to utilize it, you know, in whatever way, what would it be in your treatment of it? And for the conservation end, what is one of the most interesting things that you've had to do? What do you see coming down the road, I think, that's going to be not necessarily an aggravation, but a real challenge in a good way to have to work with on a more regular basis?
So for me, I think it's just like, I'd really like to do a tapestry, like a really big sort of like giant sort of tapestry. I mean, it doesn't really apply to sort of like the public art realm.
That's fine. Yeah.
But it's sort of like I'm really curious about that process. I've seen some really amazing works, you know, contemporary works in using tapestry as a kind of medium. I think that would be kind of really fascinating. I think it's sort of like sculpturally, it's just like.
Well, it's no man on a horse, you know. So
no, it's no man on a horse.
Very different.
Piece in wood right now, actually. It's sort of like 3D printed wood. Well, it's not it's like, and that's like, I'm kind of really excited about, you know, working in wood, weirdly. So it's just like, it's really this sort of so basic for me, you know. So I'm the Costco of artists, essentially, or the no-name artist. So yeah, I think it's like stuff that, you know, that survives, you know. It's like, if you're thinking about longevity, like I remember in art school, it's like there was all this sort of like joking about Julian Schnabel's pieces, you know, it's like his early neo-expressionist stuff was just falling apart because it's like he's just stuck stuff on. You know, I just think it's like, I wouldn't want to be in charge of taking care of something like that. It's just like, be kind to people, you know, use bronze.
I actually knew the guy in New York he had a full-time job, and it was to fly from place to place and rebondo those plates on it.
Oh my God.
Full-time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Catherine?
Yeah, so what I have a feeling it's coming is digital public artwork. So artwork that just lives on, you know, we can just view it on a computer, or artwork that that you need a telephone to, you know, the virtual was it VR?
AR, VR.
Yeah, just to view, just to see the artwork. Like that, to me, that is just so, it's a challenge for me to even like visually, or like even try and understand how to even conserve something like that. But I have a feeling that's on the way. And that's something that I gotta reckon with real fast.
Have you seen any RFPs, or have either of you seen anything like this yet coming out?
No, I mean,
outside of technically specific, you know, locations.
I think most people, because I'm, you know, dealing with like physical spaces, they want something in the physical space. It's really hard to get them on board with things that are kind of collaborative, or kind of like, you know, social practice, those kinds of things. They're really not into that at all. Like, it's just like, it's beyond the sort of their mindset. So I'm not sure how the VR thing would work, to be honest.
Yeah, it's tough. I just got a note that the city of Mississauga has a digital public art program for
Awesome.
Rachel P. So I guess on that note, we'll wrap this up. I want to thank, and I'll turn this back over to our hosts. Thank you both of you. This has been really interesting, and I wish we could have like a part 2 where I could go through my notes and then bring it back, and we could just consolidate and zero in and drill down on a few things. But unfortunately, I think the nature of these kinds of things is to keep it very loose in general. But I applaud you both, and thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much.
And I'm Rebecca Carbon. I want to chime in right at the end here and thank the three of you for a really exciting conversation, very open, very candid, with a kind of peppered with humor, which is always appreciated. And it was it gave me a lot to think about. And I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. So it was really great to have some new things to chew on. I also want to thank everybody who joined us today for doing so and zooming in from wherever you are in the world. We really appreciate having had your time to share the knowledge of Jason, Myfanwy, and Catherine with you. So I hope it's been equally as engaging for you as it has been for us. For me, again, I also would love to do a second hour of this. There were some ideas around authorship and related to that ownership, which I think we could spend a long time talking and thinking about, both in terms of materiality and the kind of acceptable spectrum of how a piece degrades or exists in the public realm, but then of course what Jason alluded to in his opening comments about how the changing role that monuments play in the public realm, and how different publics of different generations respond to those. And I think it's really, I agree completely that there's a lot to be done with temporary public art programming that can be very timely and doesn't have to stand the test of time. But the fact that we have cave paintings that are 64,000 years old suggests that we as a species like to leave our mark for future generations to see and to kind of contemplate. And so it's really interesting, the moment that we're in now, figuring out how we deal with building monuments for the future, and how those are kind of trying to anticipate how those will be understood while we're also dealing with monuments from the past. And it's something that I think those of us working in this field need to be giving a lot of thought to, and trying to participate in how we deal with those problematic monuments, because I think erasing ugly parts of our history unilaterally is not necessarily the way to heal. So really interesting. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Thank you so much to Yan Wu and to Anik Glode for all of the hard work that you have done in making this happen, and hoping you all have a brilliant Friday afternoon and that you'll join us at our summit in September. Thanks all.